My name is Stella. I am 24 years old. I used to believe that the worst sound in the world was silence. But I was wrong, and it was the sharp, tearing rip of paper that changed my life forever. The night everything shattered began so normally that it almost feels cruel in hindsight. Our dining table was set like it always was on Sundays. Polished wood glowing under the chandelier, plates perfectly aligned, my father sitting at the head like a king surveying his territory. I remember how tightly my fingers curled around the envelope resting on my lap. The college crest embossed in gold, my future sealed inside. I had rehearsed that moment 1,000 times. The smiles, the pride, maybe even a rare hug. Instead, I got a lesson I never saw coming. When I finally gathered the courage, my voice trembled but my heart soared. "Dad, I got accepted." The words barely left my mouth before his expression hardened. A storm cloud swallowing any warmth. He didn't ask where, didn't ask how. He simply extended his hand. I placed the letter in his palm, still hopeful, still foolish. He scanned it for less than a second. Then came the sound, that violent, merciless rip as he tore my college acceptance letter at dinner, the pieces falling like confetti at a celebration of my humiliation. The room froze. My mother's fork stopped midair. My breath vanished. And my father leaned back satisfied, delivering the sentence that would echo in my mind for years. "No daughter of mine needs an education." The words were not shouted. They were declared, cold and absolute, like a law carved into stone. Shame burned through me, but worse than that was disbelief. I searched his face for any hint of regret, any sign this was some twisted joke. There was none. Across the table, my grandmother, the quiet observer of countless family storms, said nothing. She just sat there. 1 second, 5 seconds, 10. The ticking clock grew unbearably loud. My father smirked, mistaking her silence for agreement, for submission. But my grandmother had always been a woman of timing. She sat quietly for what felt like an eternity, but was later measured in my memory as exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds that stretched like a held breath before an explosion. Then, with a calmness that sliced through the tension, she pushed her chair back. The scrape against the floor sounded like thunder. Slowly, deliberately, she stood up, every eye locked on her. Without a word, she put on her coat, smoothing the fabric with steady hands, the ritual strangely ceremonial. My father chuckled, amused, convinced he was still in control. That was his greatest mistake. My grandmother turned to him, her gaze sharp enough to cut glass, and spoke with a clarity that made the air itself feel different. "Pack her bags." Confusion rippled across his face before morphing into laughter. Loud, mocking, dismissive laughter. "Oh, come on," he scoffed, waving a hand. "You can't be serious." But she didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply reached into her handbag, movements unhurried, and pulled out a folded document that looked painfully ordinary for something so devastating. My father laughed until she pulled out the deed to his house. I watched the color drain from his face, watched certainty crumble into horror as realization dawned with brutal precision. The house he bragged about, the symbol of his authority, the fortress from which he dictated my fate. It was never truly his. It had always belonged to her. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, stunned silence far heavier than before. My grandmother's voice remained steady, almost gentle, which somehow made it even more terrifying. "You were so busy deciding your daughter's future," she said, "you forgot who gave you yours." No one moved. No one breathed. My father, the man who believed he held absolute power, sat there speechless, dwarfed by the woman he had underestimated his entire life. And I, still trembling, still trying to process the wreckage of my torn dreams, realized that this dinner was no longer about my acceptance letter. It was about something much bigger: control, pride, and consequences. I didn't know it then, but that night was not the end of my humiliation. It was the beginning of a reckoning none of us would ever forget. My father's laughter collapsed into a broken, breathless silence, the kind that feels unreal, like the world itself has paused to witness a downfall. His eyes locked onto the deed in my grandmother's hand, scanning the paper again and again as if repetition might change the truth. The man who had just torn my future apart now looked as though the ground beneath him had vanished. No one spoke. No one needed to. The shift in power was so absolute it was almost visible, like a storm cloud passing from one person to another. My grandmother's gaze never wavered. "You built your pride inside walls that were never yours," she said quietly, her voice carrying more weight than my father's loudest outbursts ever had. My mother sat frozen, shock etched across her face, while I remained motionless, still trying to reconcile the humiliation I had felt minutes ago with the surreal reversal unfolding before me. My father finally found his voice, but it emerged weak, stripped of its usual authority. This isn't possible!" His words were brittle, desperate. My grandmother tilted her head slightly, not in mockery, but in something closer to disappointment. "Possible?" she repeated. "I made it possible." The air in the room tightened. My father pushed his chair back abruptly, standing as though movement alone might restore control. But the gesture rang hollow. The deed did not disappear. The truth did not bend. His house, the symbol of his dominance, the stage for his declarations, the place where he believed his word was law, had never belonged to him. I watched his identity fracture in real time, the certainty draining from his posture, the arrogance leaking from his expression. It was terrifying and mesmerizing all at once. "You were given everything," my grandmother continued, each word precise, deliberate, "and you mistook that gift for superiority." My father's jaw tightened, but there was no fire left in his defiance. Only panic. "Why would you do this?" he demanded, grasping for outrage, for any emotion that might feel familiar. My grandmother did not hesitate. "Because I was waiting to see what kind of man you would become." That sentence landed harder than any accusation. The room seemed to shrink around us. My father's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, as though the weight of years, of choices, of cruelty, of unchecked ego had suddenly become unbearable. He looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time that night. But whatever he searched for in my face, sympathy, forgiveness, understanding, he did not find. All I felt was a strange, disorienting mix of vindication and grief. This was my father, yet this was also the man who had shredded my dreams without hesitation. My grandmother stepped closer to the table, placing the deed down with calm finality. The soft touch of paper against wood echoed like a judge's gavel. "You told her no daughter of mine needs an education," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "But you forgot something crucial." My father swallowed, his composure visibly unraveling. "What?" he asked, the word barely audible. My grandmother's voice remained steady, but it carried an unmistakable edge of steel. "Nothing you have was ever yours to use as a weapon." The silence that followed was unbearable. My father's gaze dropped to the torn fragments of my acceptance, letter still scattered across the table, tiny pieces of what should have been a triumph. The sight seemed to hit him with delayed force. His face contorted, not with anger but with something far more unsettling, dawning regret. He reached toward the scraps, fingers trembling but stopped midway, as though even touching them now required permission he no longer possessed. I didn't mean," he began, the sentence collapsing under its own weakness. The man who once spoke in commands now struggled to assemble words. My grandmother did not rescue him. "Intent," she said softly, "does not erase impact." My mother finally stirred, her voice shaky. "Please, this is getting out of hand." But it wasn't out of hand. It was the most controlled moment I had ever witnessed. My grandmother turned slightly, her expression unwavering. "No," she replied. "This is the first time things are exactly where they belong." My father sank back into his chair, the movement slow, defeated, the energy drained from him. The transformation was staggering. The authority he wielded so casually had been revealed as conditional, borrowed, fragile. And with that revelation came something I never expected to see. Tears. Not loud, theatrical sobs, but silent. Stunned tears slipping down his face as he stared at the ruins of his certainty. "I was trying to protect you," he whispered, the justification sounding hollow even as he spoke it. I felt the words strike me like a distant echo. Too late, too thin. Protect me from what? From growth? From independence? From becoming something beyond his control? My grandmother's expression softened, but her resolve did not. Control is not protection, she said. Fear is not love. My father covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking, the collapse complete. The man who believed he could dictate my worth had been forced to confront a reality he never imagined. Power built on dominance is an illusion, and illusions shatter. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing that the tearing sound I once thought was the worst noise in the world had been replaced by something even more profound, the soundless, irreversible breaking of pride. That night did not just expose who owned the house. It exposed who had truly been in control all along. And in the wreckage of that revelation, my future, once reduced to scraps, began, quietly and irrevocably, to rebuild itself.